So, a question for you. Would you wear a sweater once worn by a serial killer? Let's say it's been dry cleaned, so there's no blood on it. There are no serial killer cooties on it. But still, most people say no. Now, why is that? Most people can't explain why. It's just a feeling. It's an instinct. It reveals the human propensity for fetishizing objects. Fetishizing in the religious and anthropological sense. We imbue certain objects with special properties that aren't actually in those objects. We've been considering the emotion that we call awe this month, and we've talked about what it is and how we experience it. So today I want to talk about practical uses of that emotion called awe. Because, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, awe occurs naturally, but it can also be elicited. The easiest way to see this human tendency, I think, is through sacred relics. In Proto-Italy, you can view a belt worn by the Virgin Mary, given to none other than doubting Thomas right before Mary ascended unto heaven. That's a special belt. Proto-Italy. In Padua, you can visit St. Anthony's tongue and lower jaw. St. Teresa de Avila is much revered as a patron saint of Spain, so much so that during the Spanish Civil War, General Franco had St. Teresa's left hand cut off her dead body, and he carried it with him all the way through the war. He is rumored to have died holding it, and today you can visit that hand in Andalusia. Speaking of Christmas, in Germany, Cologne Cathedral houses the bodies of the three wise men. You can go visit them. No fewer than 18 European churches claim to have the foreskin of Jesus. Now that was a very wild bris. Sacred relics aren't confined to Christianity, of course. A tooth that supposedly belonged to the Buddha is in the, fittingly enough, called Temple of the Tooth in Sri Lanka. In Istanbul, you can view a hair from the beard of the Prophet Muhammad. And, if you like cloak and dagger stuff, you may know that Muhammad's cloak went missing from the Shrine of the Cloak in Kandahar in 1996, probably stolen by the Taliban. Now, please realize I'm not poking fun at religion. I'm outlining a very powerful human trait. And besides, the power of fetishes is not only religious. Sometime you want to kill some time, do a web search on Napoleon's penis. It's gotten around quite a bit over the years. And it is owned today by a New York City urologist. Now, you can't make that kind of stuff up. But perhaps you have not heard that the author of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, kept her husband Percy Shelley's heart with her at all times after he died in a boating accident. After her death, the family found the heart in Mary's desk drawer wrapped in one of Percy's poems. Aww. If you're from Grand Rapids, Minnesota, you probably know that Dorothy's ruby slippers were stolen from the Judy Garland Museum there and were missing for 13 years, a case finally solved by the FBI. Parenthetically, there are actually 5 pairs of ruby slippers in existence. The Smithsonian owns 2, and 1 pair is jointly owned by Steven Spielberg and Leonardo DiCaprio. I guess they couldn't afford to buy it, just one of them. And speaking of movies, you may know that Ripley's Believe It or Not bought Han Solo's original blaster at auction for $550,000. No, it doesn't work, right? Sadly for posterity, Luke Skywalker's original lightsaber appears to have been lost. Or was it? We humans also fetishize intersubjective realities, such as flags, national character traits, and national borders. These are all collective fetishes. And of course, we've got our own personal ones too. I'd say everybody here today has at least a few objects that are somehow extremely important to you personally. Jewelry worn by a loved one, dishes, furniture, a particular location that reminds you of a special time or a special person, and on and on. And as the serial killer sweater demonstrates, we also fetishize things or places that we find repugnant. A weapon used in a murder, a house where a murder took place, things of that nature. Now, why is that? Is it that we somehow intuit that evil is a quantity that can stick to an object and maybe rub off on us? Evil cooties? Another example is the first name Adolf. It was really popular in Germany before the end of the Second World War, but now only about a dozen or so babies are called Adolf in Germany today. There's something in a name, and people avoid that one nowadays. From serial killers to Elvis's sequined Las Vegas comeback jumpsuit, $250,000 at auction, it's all about the power of objects. Power, prestige, money, and magic, and awe. A few years ago, cognitive neuroscientist Bruce Hood published a book called Supersense, Why We Believe in the Unbelievable. That's what I was reading from this morning. Dr. Hood began his career in child psychology, and he began to notice an interesting phenomenon. Very early in their lives, children began to fetishize objects and to generate what we might call supernatural beliefs around those objects. It interested Dr. Hood that this appears to be spontaneous in children. It's an instinct. And not only that, but as adults, we retain many of those intuitions even when we don't consciously believe them anymore. Almost none of us here this morning would think that a serial killer's sweater could infect us with evil were we to put it on. But Dr. Hood's research shows that most of us here today would cringe away from that sweater. Many of us would happily throw darts at a picture of Adolf Hitler, but many of us would think twice before we threw darts at pictures of babies. But it is just paper in both cases, after all. Hood gives lectures in which he shows a sweater and says that it belonged to a serial killer. It actually didn't. The reaction is predictable. And not only that, but when he asks for a show of hands of the people who would wear the sweater, who would wear that sweater? People cringe away from those people when they see them raise their hand. It's an instinct, and it is implanted deep in our psyches. Our brains are good for a whole lot of things, but there need to be some warnings in the user's manual for our brains. One warning is that we are very, very good at recognizing patterns and making sense of things, even when those things are completely random and completely senseless. Because here's the thing. Every fetish, every talisman, every special object is actually a story we tell, isn't it? Our grandmother's ring, the Mona Lisa. They're objects that have had stories attached to them, and therefore we perceive them as having special properties. Now, it may be only a story about a story, but the story goes that Ernest Hemingway was once challenged to write the shortest story he could write, and he was known for writing short stories. Now, here's the story that Hemingway may or may not have created. Someone did. We don't know who exactly. But the title is For Sale. And the story goes, baby shoes, never worn. 6 words. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. Now, Hemingway understood that objects tell stories. Now, I want you to hang up that thought for just a minute, and I'll come back to it. And let's think about this first. Back when I was a professor, I used to travel the conference circuit. Yeah, I don't do that anymore, but I still kind of keep up on what the latest conference topics are, because I think they reveal something about the zeitgeist, the spirit of the time. A topic that's popped up as a conference topic several times in the past couple of years is resentment. Resentment. Resentment's become a topic because it may well explain what's going on geopolitically at the moment. Resentment explains why right-wing populist leaders are gaining political power around the globe. Resentment about social class, resentment concerning gender, race, and ethnicity, resentment of refugees and immigrants, resentment about a perceived loss of prestige or status or power or wealth. And the list of resentments goes on. Like our propensity toward fetishizing objects, resentment appears to be an instinct. We quite naturally feel resentment personally, and resentment can be cultivated within groups to bond those people together for political purposes. Many people can be convinced to fetishize things such as flags, national groups, religions, national borders. Then we can be convinced to resent groups that we believe are outside those circles. If you haven't seen the TED Talk by the Nigerian novelist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie called The Danger of One Story, treat yourself this afternoon and watch it. That's the order of service quote at the top this morning from her. The problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. They make one story become the only story. So, here's the crux of the matter. We're all prone toward fetishizing objects. We're all prone toward inventing and believing stories that comport with our version of reality. And we are all prone toward resenting groups or persons that we feel have unjustly gained something. Those are all natural human traits. The combination of a fetish and a need to make sense of things that don't make sense and a resentment is a powerful mixture that can cause some dangerous things. From 9/11 to UFOs to Benghazi, it's where conspiracy theories come from. It's where magical thinking comes from. It's where mass hysteria comes from. And it's where populist demagogues come from. But knowledge is power. When we know our weaknesses, we can work to undermine them personally and socially to become more fully human. Now think for a moment, national fetishes communicate things to us. They communicate social norms. Now, isn't it a little too ironic that one of our national fetished objects here in the U.S. is called Mount Rushmore? Why can't it be called Mount Rushless or Mount Chill Out? Now, I know it's just happenstance that Mount Rushmore is the name of a place where the faces of some of our fetishized old white guys are carved. But in another bit of irony, the Lakota called that mountain Six Grandfathers. Now, I suspect that those six grandfathers weren't telling anybody to rush more. The idea that rushing more will get you there is fetishizing productivity and success. And so we tell ourselves stories about success. But, of course, success is not an object. It's not something you can put in your pocket or in your handbag or put on a fireplace mantle. And that's why success is a chimera. As I've said before, to me the central question for all of us every day is, how should I live my life? It's the existential question every day that Camus tells us, look in the mirror and ask yourself. It's the first question, the last question, and the question we face every day. How should I live my life? Now, one good answer is that we will rid ourselves of as much magical thinking and delusion as it is possible to get rid of, with our brains working as they do. Another good answer is freeing ourselves from all the emotional baggage that we're always schlepping about. And another good answer is living in such a way as to increase the flourishing of people, living things, and the planet. Good reasons to get up in the morning. As I've explored the concept of awe this month, we've said that it serves to break down the ego and make each of us feel part of a larger whole. And that's what the classical mystical experience is all about. It's what awe is about for us in our experience of being alive. It can change our minds. The central thing is breaking through ego formations, the damaging stories we listen to, and the damaging stories that we tell ourselves. Now, back to that reading from cognitive neuroscientist Bruce Hood. He said, studies reveal that the two systems of thinking, the intuitive and the rational, coexist in the same individual. There are, in effect, two different ways of interpreting the world, end quote. Our intuitive thinking too often fetishizes what the dominant culture fetishizes: wealth, property, success, beauty, strength, youth, and on and on. We get caught up in those sorts of stories all too easily. And that's when we get confused about that question, how should I live my life? Suddenly the answer is success rather than kindness, and me instead of us. Now, we face a state and a nation and a planet that's filled with resentments. Worldwide, we see leaders stoking resentment and using it to gain power and control over people. We can surrender to despair, that's easy, or we can choose to go on. And I always personally choose to live as if my vote matters, as if my voice matters, as if my nation were a democracy, as if humanity can survive. It's all about reminding ourselves of our human weaknesses and living into the process. Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.